Welcome back. Today I'd like to analyze one of my recent daily games on chess.com. Hopefully I'll be able to learn something, and maybe you will too. And if I get through it quickly enough, I'll go on to the next daily game on my list. I have several piled up that I haven't had a chance to analyze yet. If you're new to my channel, I'm not a titled player or a chess coach. I'm just a random person trying to get better at chess. This was the ending position of this game. If I remember correctly, we did a threefold repetition and ended in a draw. As usual, I tried to go straight to the analysis board, but chess.com went to the game review anyway, which is a little frustrating because I only get one of these per day and it used it for this game. But anyway, it looks like my opponent and I, neither one had a blunder, but each had a miss and each had 2 mistakes and each had 3 inaccuracies. And we each played, in the mid 70s percentile wise. It says I played a little better, like a 1250, and my opponent only played like an 1150. Well, that's pretty accurate because my daily rating currently, as of this game, was 1250. According to the graph, I led almost the entire game, but my opponent had a mild advantage here near the end, but then they gave it back to me, and apparently I was ahead when we repeated. So to keep this short, I guess I'll focus on this point here at which I lost the advantage, try to learn something from that, and then when my opponent gave it back to me, and what I should have done instead of repeating. I think 4.6 looks like was the highest point that I had here at that position. Once we let the engine run, it's plus 4.2, and it was my turn. What did I play? I played rook to e1. Well, that's obvious why I did that, to line it up with their queen, hoping for some sort of discovery. And the secondary reason for that was so that they would see me lining up with their queen and that they would move it so that when I took this knight, it would mess up this pawn structure around their king. I didn't have a chance to turn the lines off before I saw what it said I should have played. I should have played king to h1 or queen to d2. And I'm up 2 points of material because at some point I got a bishop for a pawn. So I have all my minor pieces here. My opponent's missing a minor piece. So, okay, I don't know how to figure out that the queen to d2 is a good move, except, my bishop is undefended. But at this point, I didn't suspect that they were going to move that knight to attack my bishop. And after I moved my rook over, like I said, if they had threatened the bishop or something like that, I would have moved the knight out of the way so they would have to run with their queen, and then I would have taken this knight. But apparently that wasn't the right plan. King to h1, I guess I understand it gets it off of the path of this bishop, which is, hidden itself over here. That's just a safe move, but I felt like this was more of an active move. I'm actively doing something that threatens my opponent. So I'm not sure how I could have chosen one of those moves over this one. If anybody knows, let me know. But after I played that lost at least a full point of my advantage or close to it. No, it's climbed back up. We went from 4.2 to 3.4, so nearly a full point of my advantage. But it says they will be fine if they play queen to e5. Oh, that's here because this pawn is pinned because I didn't move my king. Okay, so they can move here, still protect the knight. It says if they did that, then I would just take the knight. Well, my opponent did realize that I was aiming the rook at the queen. They probably didn't realize that my d-pawn was pinned, so they didn't move up. But they tried to keep protecting the knight by going back to d8. Interestingly, their second best move is king to h8. I'm not sure what that would have done at all. And it says if they had played king to h8, I still would have taken this knight, but I wouldn't have. I would have moved my knight. Oh, you know what? Maybe that would have been a mistake because my knight's one of the things guarding this pawn, and they have currently 2 things hitting my d-pawn. So if they had played king to h8, I probably would have messed up. Like I would have gone here, and they would have checked me, and I would have had to move out of check, and then they could have saved their queen, I guess. But they tried to keep defending the knight while getting the queen out of the way of my rook and went back there. So now I'm back up to plus 4.3 again. It's 4.2. Okay, about the same as I was before my inaccuracy. And now I don't need to get the king off the diagonal, even though I realized that I did, and I moved my king to h2. My best move is knight to d5 because their knight is pinned. It says I would have played knight to d5. Their best move probably would have been moving the rook over, and then I could have taken that with check. They would have had to have taken with the pawn, which would have messed up the pawn structure around their king, and then I could have just moved the bishop back. Okay, I see that. That makes a lot of sense. Or knight to e4, which I guess basically does the same thing, except it says if I played that, then they could play d5. I would take it, and they would drop this knight back, and I would still take their messing up their pawn structure. No, it says I wouldn't. Wait, what? If I played knight to e4 and they played d5 and I took there and they dropped this knight back to aim at my pawn, then I would play d6? No, I wouldn't. I would have taken that knight there. I'm positive. But anyway, I do understand both of those moves, what they do. They aim at that knight, which is pinned to the queen. Okay. But here I did see that my king was on this diagonal. Last turn, king to h1 was my best move, but I moved h2, and I'm not sure what's so wrong with that. I did move my king. That's a huge problem because they can check me. because my bishop's undefended. Okay, I do understand this one. Okay, backing up. If I was going to move my king at all, it should have been to h1. Because I didn't play queen to d2 earlier defending the bishop. That bishop's hanging, and I put my king where they can check me, and it's actually a good move for my opponent to give up the knight for the bishop. I wonder how much advantage I would have lost if I'd played king to h1 here. Not nearly as much as king to h2 because now they can't check me. That makes sense. Well, even though my opponent didn't notice this pawn being pinned earlier when they could have moved the queen up there, they did notice that my bishop's undefended and they decided to give up the knight for it. So they did find this. Of course, I'm going to take it and they're going to get my bishop. I'm still up 2 points of material because I still have an extra piece and I'm still ahead by almost +3 if I'll just take their knight over there on c6. I'm up 2.5 if I'll go to f3, which defends this pawn. I did notice that that pawn was hanging. Their queen is right here pointed at it. And so I played bishop to h3. That's worse, probably because I'm not sure why it's worse, except that it puts the bishop on the edge of the board, pointed at basically nothing. That's about the shortest possible diagonal I could put my bishop on. Whereas here, I'm still on the longest diagonal and protecting that pawn. Okay, I understand why bishop to f3 would be better. I don't understand taking the knight. It says they would take back, which I guess, obviously that they would, and then I would play knight to e4, but then wouldn't they take this pawn? It says they wouldn't. Why wouldn't they? Let's say I had taken the knight, just out of curiosity, they took back, and then it's still knight to e4. Why wouldn't they take this pawn? If they did take that pawn, they would be aiming at this undefended knight. How bad would it be if they took that? Really bad, because I can check them, they have to take, and then I'm going to move the rook over, and I win their queen. So they're basically going to give up the queen for the rook. Okay, wow. All right, I think I understand that. If I take here, I shouldn't have to worry about them taking this pawn because I'm going to threaten their queen here, and their queen's going to have to run away. If it does take the pawn, I have this. Okay, that's what, a 3-4 move idea to protect that pawn? All right, I think I understand, but I don't understand why this is really bad other than I'm no longer patrolling the really long diagonal. Now they need to move this rook over to e8 or the other rook. But maybe they were worried about getting their queen trapped over here, although they shouldn't have been. I can't really trap their queen. But I think that they saw that because I have moved all these pawns around my king, and I've got my bishop stuck over here at the side, they saw that there's nothing guarding this space right in here. And so they shot down here to e3, which turned out to be a miss. It's weird to rate it as a miss because it's not like they missed a piece, but they missed one of these moves apparently. But yeah, they shot down in here to e3, I guess hoping to check me here. That's a miss because I can just move my king over, and then they won't be able to check me in here. And if I don't move my king over, I should probably play knight to g3, giving up that pawn. Wait, sorry. That pawn's defended. They wouldn't take it. It says they would take it with the queen. Okay, this is more complicated than I thought it was. I do understand king to g2 because clearly they can come in here with their queen and start checking me. But knight to g3, okay, that opens up the rook's attack. So that's why they would take it with their queen. Okay, why didn't I see that? The whole time I had been planning on moving the knight when the queen was down there. So why didn't I move the knight here? Probably because I was worried about them checking me. And it says that's one of their moves. But if they had, then I could just block with the bishop. And it says that they would put this rook over here, and of course I would go after their queen, which would have to run away back to e3, or they could even take over here, but the engine would go to e3, and my opponent would probably go here. Then I would play knight g to e4, which keeps their rook from seeing down in here and protects that knight that was undefended. And they would run away. Now they have a bunch of pieces aimed at my d-pawn, but I would play knight to d5, which would kind of force them to take the d-pawn. Not really, because they can come back down here, but they probably would. And then we would trade off the queens, like so. I would have to move my rook probably. No, I wouldn't want to move my rook. I would want to threaten one of their rooks. For some reason, they wouldn't take mine. Check me first. When I got out of check, they still wouldn't take my rook. They would play d5, and I would take it. Then they would take, my knight. And I'm way ahead, even though my opponent is now ahead on material. Because I can take their knight. What? Okay, well that was a long series there. I doubt either my opponent or I would have found any of those moves. So the knight to g3 thing doesn't make as much sense to me as I thought. It says they would probably take that pawn and go for the queen trade, but I should have played king to g2 here because I was kind of worried about that. But I thought I could maybe put off that worry just a little bit by chasing their knight away, and they should have just moved the knight to e5 and I would have only been at +1. But instead, here they checked me. And the only way I stay ahead is to go to h1. If I had gone to h1, wouldn't they have checked me again? Because what I did was blocked with the bishop, but I should have gone to h1. It's the only way to maintain my little lead. It says they would not have checked me again, and if they had, okay, now I block with the bishop. They get this pawn, and then I get their knight. No, I don't get their knight. Why don't I get their knight now? My only move is knight to g1. If I had gone to h1, and if they had checked me again, which wasn't their best move, I would have lost, because they would have done this, and I would have blocked with the bishop, and they would have taken this, and I would have taken the knight, but now it's mate in 2 because of queen to h4, and I can't move over. Oh my goodness, because of their bishop. Well, it was pretty sure I only had 2 legal moves here, either that or this, and I chose to block with the bishop, but that's a mistake because they can check me on h4 and I can't go down there, but I can block with the bishop again. So I blocked with the bishop again, and now they're supposed to save the knight, but instead they checked me again, and I had to go to h1. So if I gone to h1, it still says they would have saved the knight, but why wouldn't they have come in here? Why wouldn't they have played up here? Because now they're threatening mate if I take the knight, which I probably would have done. Okay, no, it says I have to play knight to g1, which protects the bishop, or knight to f4, which protects the bishop. Then they would get their knight out of danger. I would protect my knight. Okay, well, I definitely need to work on, what I need to work on is how to defend against these. And yes, I know in general it's not a good idea to move the pawns in front of your castled king. But sometimes, you know, an opponent sacrifices a piece down there, or sometimes they leave a piece hanging and so you push those pawns forward. And sometimes Stockfish says you should have pushed those pawns forward. But I do have opponents that are really, you know, really good at burrowing their way in here, and I'm not very good at defending. But this was wrong and had to be here. Okay, but since I played that, they did play queen to h4 check, and I put the bishop back, and they should have gotten the knight out of danger, but they checked me again. I should have gone to h1, and I did this time, and then they checked me here. But now I should have blocked with the bishop. But instead I went up here, and that's a draw because the threefold repetition. I guess I thought I had already blocked with the bishop, and I didn't want to do the repetition, but as it turned out, this was the repetition. Once they went there, it was over. So I blocked with the bishop when I should have moved the king, and I moved the king when I should have blocked with the bishop. Okay, well, I'm not embarrassed about this draw that should have been a win because it was really complicated. It certainly wasn't a beginner level mistakes or misses, but my opponent was able to get the draw, so, you know, good job for them. I think I have time to look at one more game, and hopefully, you know, some of this stuff will sink into my head, and I will work on it as I continue to play chess. Well, now this game ran the game review too when I clicked on the analysis icon. I had thought that with my gold level pro account here that I only got one game review per day, but this was a really short game, looks like. We were dead even until I made one mistake, and my opponent played pretty much perfectly, 96%. It says they played like a 2000, you know, so good job for them. It does say that they played one inaccuracy, but let's just take a look. My opponent played d4, and I have changed to responding with knight to f6. The Indian game, we have book moves out to about here, which this changes it to the Spielman Indian variation. I just kind of like this variation. If they take, I can put my knight here to keep them from being able to defend the pawn, and then I can play the, you know, my e-pawn to attack that pawn with my bishop. Engine says their best move is just to push past it. I don't know what I would have done if they'd play that, but the engine says b5. But they just got this knight out and didn't really care. If I took that pawn, I shouldn't have. I should have just played d5 here, but I took the pawn, which is fine. Also a book move. They can take with the queen or the knight. They took with the knight, which apparently now we're in the Van Geet opening. Van Geet? Is that related to the Vant Kruigus? Probably not, because Vant Kruigus, that's not how you say it, I'm sure, was e3, but the Van Geet, we transposed. Where did we transpose? Okay, here. When they played that knight out, it's not the Indian game anymore. Well, I didn't know that. Okay, so taking the pawn allows them to take back, and now I can play d5, which I did. Their best move is bishop to g5. The engine would play this knight over here to d7 or a6. Guess to keep one of those knights from hopping in here. I just played knight to c6. I thought if they took, I would get, you know, another pawn, you know, closer toward the center, but they're not supposed to. They're supposed to play e4 here, but they only played e3, and that's their only inaccuracy. So I have a very slight lead according to Stockfish if I'll play e5 and just go after that pawn, that knight immediately. But e6 is my second best move. I just played e5 right now because, you know, I have a pawn that it's defended by my knight and my queen, and my knight isn't technically pinned yet. But I figured I would probably want to move it at some point, so that's why I played this, to get the bishop out in castle. But I should have played e5. Okay, I understand that. Did this. They pinned my other knight. Now both knights are pinned because the pawns moved. I need to play bishop to d7, not bishop to e7. I did play bishop to d7. because this is a much more serious pen than the other one. My opponent castled. Now I play bishop to e7, and it's my best move. Okay, so we're fine. I have a very slightly. They can play knight captures c6, and of course I would take with the pawn, which would force their bishop to move and let me castle. It says I wouldn't castle though, but I probably would have. Or bishop to d3, which is dropping this one back. But they played a3, and I need to put an extra defender on this knight or castle. Okay. Well, a bunch of times in the past when my opponent had a bishop here, Stockfish said to play h6. That's what I remembered, so I played h6, which is okay. And they can put their bishop back to f4 or h4, but those are the only places that they can put it back. They went to h4, and now I should castle. But I just went after the bishop, which is still fine. They drop back to g3, and now rook to c8 or h5. Oh, I can keep coming after the bishop, but I played e5 here. I think the problem with e5 is that I was counting on my knight to be defending it because my knight's not pinned anymore because I put this bishop here, but they can take, and then the knight's not defending the pawn anymore. So when I played this pawn, they can just move the knight back, and they're still ahead. But their best move is to take my knight on c6, which they did. And when they did that, I realized, oh yeah, my knight's not guarding that anymore. So if I just take this bishop, then they pick up a pawn. So I thought, why don't I take their knight? But that's an inaccuracy. It's my second best move, but it gets us close to +2 because now they can take here with jack. And obviously I have to take back. I chose to take back with my queen, but then they take that. And I lost the pawn anyway. And normally I wouldn't resign here, but I'm already in a position that I don't like, and I didn't feel like playing this out. Also, this was one of those opponents that you sometimes get in daily games, and I was one of those people when I first started playing daily games, that as soon as you make your move, no matter how long you might take hours before you get back to the board and start considering your move, and as soon as you make your move, they immediately move within minutes. So I would make my move, I would go to check another daily game, and then this one would be ready to play again. And sometimes that gets frustrating because the whole point of daily games is to go more slowly. But I know that's a me problem. I need to, not care about that because I still have 3 days for my next move, no matter how quickly my opponent moved. But anyway, I knew I was down here. I wasn't sure, but I thought my best move might be castling. And if I castled, I've already moved pawns in front of my king, which you saw was a problem in the previous game. I figure they're probably going to want to move their rook over. Whether or not I castle on my next turn, they're also now going to be able to put this bishop right in here, protected by their d-pawn, pinning this knight, to this area. I could move my knight after I castled, but I probably wouldn't want to. Probably before too long, they're going to figure out how to pick off this pawn here. If it was a rapid game or a blitz game, I just would have played on, but it's a daily game, which, could last for hours at the rate we were playing it, or days if my opponent had slowed down a little bit. So here, now it doesn't say h5. I could go ahead and trade for this knight, and they would probably take here, and I would take it with my knight, and then they would take that, and we would have come out even. Or played this rook over here, to put extra stuff on that. Okay, just the way that I went was wrong because I was depending on the knight to defend the pawn, and it ended up going this way, which, like I said, I lost the pawn anyway. I think I got it. I would love to go through more games, but I've got other things I have to do. Thank you for spending your time here, and I'll see you next time.